Thanks so much for joining book club today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and get ready to hear from some doulas who know squat.
So my initial question was, I would like to have some thoughts, feedback on, or rather what you surmised from, the causes, the leading causes, so to say, for African American births becoming traumatic. A couple of options that I came across was, first and foremost, racism. 2, the cesarean C-sections. 3, the high tolerance pain theory. And then the interventions, which you just mentioned, the high interventions.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts?
I think those are pretty spot on, especially reading what she's talking about in there. Just that the racism alone, just the thought that Black people don't have like the same pain levels and the pain tolerance level that a white person does. That's insane to me. It's like them thinking that the babies don't feel anything. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
she's clearly screaming at something that you're doing. You don't think she feels that?
Yeah, they're like, it'll be okay. She's fine.
Empathy
She's
level
screaming in torture.
so incredibly low for
Mhm.
that to even begin to make sense to you. It's crazy to me. I actually, when I saw that you were going to ask that question, I got curious and decided there was a study that was quoted in the book from 2019 from WHO, the Giving Voice to Women study. So I decided to look it up. And it was done on 2,700 women. And it said 1 in 6 experienced mistreatment. 1 in 6 in their birth space. And to me, I was like, it's probably more than that. But those are the women who felt comfortable saying that they experienced mistreatment and labeled it that way. But it was Indigenous, 32.8% of people, Hispanic 25, Black 22.5, and white 14. And Black people were 2 times as likely to report being ignored, refused, or delayed treatment, which was then correlated directly to newborns having health problems, obviously.
Right. Well, and they weren't listening to those women about concerns they had for their newborn too. So, we were missing a lot of the complications that were happening, which then leads to infant mortality and maternal mortality rates increasing.
Yeah. So I was thinking about the prevalence of this and the fact that there was also a correlation made where the higher percentage of mistreatment occurred where birth philosophy didn't align. So people going with providers that didn't support them, which she does talk about later. I think it's all the way back in chapter 4 or 5 that she talks about the importance.
I'm really bad at paying attention to chapters, but she does talk about it. Yeah, early on, she talks about it. Because she talks about choosing a doctor who looks similar to you. And she was very surprised that her
that's
doctor, chapter 4, where she was very surprised that her doctor, who had skin color similar to hers, was so brainwashed in just her OB practices that, I mean, she did not feel listened to. She did not feel supported or heard in any way. And that was why she chose to switch to a different provider.
And that's not unusual. I mean, like I went to a meetup. It was like a Black women meetup last week. And that was one of our discussions, was like, the system is fine. The system is working the way the system was built. The system was not built for certain people. And so when people are like, oh, they didn't do this for me, or I didn't have this, or like you're saying, like the indoctrination of people of certain cultures, being pulled into that same status quo that everyone else is learning in medical school. It's because they're learning the system, and the system is going to keep putting out those people, no matter color, no matter, no matter skin color, no matter what their hopes and dreams was to come in and try to change. They can't change a system that doesn't have any flaws to it. Like the system has to be broken all the way down and completely rebuilt to encompass everyone. So when you go into the hospital, this is why, and in my belief, that it is still that high tolerance of pain because it's still being taught. It's in the system. This is why, it's like, well, maybe I expect on my side to get someone who's understanding the plight as a Black woman, or to say, hey, I'm gonna help you advocate, but they're not taught that. So that's them kind of going off the tracks of the teaching, which is okay, but they still have to face their counterparts. They still have to be in these groups and organizations of people who are following the system. So it's like, how much can you really step outside the system without being a part of it anymore? Because they get ostracized, they get the black sheep type of effect if they're not following the process.
Well, and they can lose their
The
jobs.
system is the system. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
they
system
can
is the
lose their
system.
job. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and then, if they're stepping outside the system and hospital policies, and someone chooses to sue, the hospital's not
Yeah.
going to back them anymore. They're not going to protect them.
Nope.
So they have to follow those policies and procedures, which just puts us right back into high C-section rates and the
Yep, it
racism
puts us right back.
aspect. Yeah, and those high intervention rates, regardless of how labor is actually progressing. I was reading some of the comments. So on Facebook in the ICANN group, one lady in there anonymously was asking, why is my client being told as a second C-section, she's wanted to go VBAC, why is she told that she's just going to have to do a VBAC anyway, or we're going to have to induce with Pitocin, which is counter to what you're supposed to be doing, because we all know it increases your rupture potential. Sorry, baby in the background. And that's another perfect example of doctors needing to feel in control of the situation and using all of these interventions, and not listening to the parent, not listening to that mom who's knowing her body and knows, I can do it this way.
Yeah, people
I
have
agree.
fun. I really loved, I underlined it. I should have written down what, oh, that's very convenient. It's only page 11. Where she writes that she carries the strength of her ancestors in her soul, that she's heard stories of runaway slaves birthing in cotton fields attempting to seek refuge, while others worked until the last crop was picked and birthed in log cabins surrounded by granny midwives and kinfolk. I assure you, we once birthed with no interventions, but with plenty of wisdom and intimacy. Like, that's beautiful.
That was so
Doesn't it
awful, but-
sound beautiful? And you're like, why can't we still have this? Like,
I mean,
it's
a lot of
supposed
it
to
throw
be
it
a
out, but
beautiful moment.
yeah, the beauty part, I mean, most of that sentence was just like, ooh, awful. But
the support part, the community.
Yes, and the ability to do these things and the trust in your own body. And I love that sentiment of carrying that strength in your soul. And I love that this whole thing is storytelling. I feel like the best ways to learn and teach about birth.
Same. I love the storytelling aspect of it.
But back to your original question, which I have a feeling we're gonna have to do a lot. These are such topics that bring up so many different things. C-sections. I got curious about that too. And Black women currently, according to 2024 March of Dimes, using stats from the National Center of Health, 36.6%.
That is massive amount.
36.6.
A
And
lot
then
of C-sections.
Pacific Islanders 33, Hispanic 31.6, and white 30.9, American Indian 29.1.
And again, like you said, those are the reportable numbers, because we all know, like, the ones who will come in and just like want to be done aren't, you know, they're not saying anything, or they're having failed home births and then may have to go in, and then they rush them right in to try to get them a C-section instead of like, where are we in the process? What's going on? Let's try this bit by bit. Yeah, they're just like, no, let's go ahead and get the baby out.
Or those failures to progress.
Any
Yeah.
intervention, really. And we've got a whole, you're so intervention happy. We've got a whole list of things that we can do before we rush to this, unless it's contraindicated. But, you know,
Right.
most of the time when you're having a home transfer, they need sleep. They're tired. So the whole like give them an epidural and then maybe see where things go. If their body kicks up on its own once it's slept a little bit, totally valid most of the time.
Right.
Yep.
We see it all the time.
I hate that term failed. They didn't fail.
I hate it too.
Yeah.
It's so degrading.
The word fail. I know it is. It fail. I mean, why do you have to use that word? Like I don't like it. I don't like it.
I don't like it either.
It really is mentally and emotionally like you know, it makes them just feel like my body is not.
My body doesn't know what to do.
Yeah,
it didn't know how to
my
do
body
this.
is confusing. Yep. My body's confusing this, and it's a failure. So there's my body. Like, that's it.
Yep.
Like, I don't know what I can do to help it, because it just can't do it.
Yeah.
And so that word, it resonates. I was just saying, I had a client I just talked to about her C-section, and that was her exact feelings, where she was like, my body just, you know, it couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like, it just failed. And I was like, no, that's not quite it. No. I said, in all, the medical staff set her up for the induction, citing that her amniotic fluids was slightly low.
Slightly low.
Sent her, as they tend to do now, right from her medical appointment to the hospital. So of course she's already past her due date. So without a doubt, they're going to keep her. So she's at 40 and some odd days, and God forbid she get to 41. God forbid. So they're like, yeah, we got to go ahead and induce. And so as they're just like pumping on his medication, she's going great. She's just based off of just regular stuff they do pre-Pitocin. Then they add in the Pitocin, and at the same time break the water, which at this point she's only like a 5. So she starts from closed, she's at a 5. And from there, they learned that they had not put the Pitocin in properly. So she had never been getting all the Pitocin. So she's now exhausted. She's reached 7, but she's super exhausted off of whatever small percentage of Pitocin she had been getting in her body doing the work. So they were like upping up the Pitocin more and more and more, because they thinking she's handling it, but she wasn't getting all of it because her IV wasn't properly connected. So again, has nothing to do with her body.
Was it dripping on the floor or something?
It wasn't doing anything. It just was like going in some and then stopping, which I would have thought they'd have been able to tell from how much should have been registering coming from the bag, that it still looks like you have a lot that you should have, because they do this every day. Like, you know, is this less in the bag and it's been an hour or not? No.
I wonder if they went
complaining though that the site,
like, only partially going actually into her bloodstream and the rest was just going in, because it wouldn't do anything if it wasn't in the blood.
So she's complaining like this site is like not feeling right. And so finally, after much push and pull, we get them to change the IV site to somewhere that can filter through the Pitocin. So now we're exhausted though. So my thing was, we all know Pitocin is like kind of like a stimulus to the brain, right? So I'm like, we need to let her ground. Like we need to let her go back down to ground zero, let her baseline a little bit, maybe then
But
add on.
then we have to start back over at 0.
Yeah, that was what our response was. So they're like, no, let's just go ahead and give her the epidural and then turn that sucker back on once we once we get her hooked up, high enough. And that
Doctor,
way we can
didn't
double
you know
duty
you
her.
can rupture her by doing that,
That
by not giving her a break?
So no break came, and essentially, again, nothing to do with her body. This is all medical decisions. Of course, she has to consent, but this is first baby, so she's not, and you can, as a doula in the space, you can only push and pull, but so much.
Right.
When you don't want to make the space awkward, like you're lying. And I know you can't, so you're just like, yeah, but I, in my past history with seeing and, experience, that has not been, oh, it has been, okay. And data says, okay. So, we're playing that game, and I'm just kind of like, okay, all right. And my client is just exhausted. I mean, that's the bottom line. She's exhausted. So she's like, let's just do it. Because I'm ready to be done. I'm exhausted. Well, no sooner than they give her that, of course, everything bottoms. Blood pressure bottoms, baby's heart rate bottoms, soon as they get her on the epidural. Because we never let her baseline. Well, I won't even say we. They never let her baseline to get us a good start of where we need to be with all the medication. So we're pumping in all these two strong medications at the same time, and her body was already doing the work. So her body is confused. So then they give her a medication to stop her contractions completely, thinking that this is going to save the baby's heart rate. Meanwhile, we also did another medication to up her blood pressure because it's bottoming. Neither work. So we do another dose. We do another round. So at this point, I just had to be very transparent with my client, and I was like, we're in the intervention loop. And unfortunately, I don't see this quite going where we had hoped it would go, because it's not looking really good for baby's heart rate. Your blood pressure is way too low. We're like 94 over 54. Like, we're way too low. Medicine is not absorbing well. So they come back in, not like maybe 5-10 minutes after I've had this conversation. And they're like, let's do a cervical check really fast to see where you are. Okay, you have not moved, but we have not, because we've been stressed. And so we're tense. And so, no, nothing's going on anymore because we've done all the things, and she's lost focus of where we need to be in the process of her contractions. So now they make the call like, you know what, I don't like the way things are going or way things feel. So let's go ahead and get you back there to get this baby out, because it's become now like medical necessity. It's becoming really dangerous. So all in all, long story short, mom was supposed to birth at the birth center. She got caught in that closure loop of not being in enough time, and then them moving the date. It really got her, like, you know what I mean? Like, her whole mindset had went into fear-based anyway, because she knew she had to go to the hospital. The more that they gave those options out, which would have never happened at the birth center, the more she felt like her body was not doing what it needed to do. And so when, you're after 40 weeks, your body is not having contractions, something's wrong with you. You're coming in, you're getting induced, and now you're like, failure to progress, you're stalled, your body's not doing the work. So all of these things have really, like, mentally and emotionally pointed to your body can't do it. And you needed us to do it, and essentially do the cesarean to get your baby out. So, and I just told her, I was like, it's something that you kind of have to grieve at your own pace, and at your own time, but you do have to grieve it, because it was an unnecessary cesarean. It really was unnecessary. Like, I think there's so many different ways that we could have gone about it where it would have been a lot better for her, and she could have been feeling more enthused in her body. But as Black women, and I'm noticing more so, especially when that postpartum period comes, there's no empathy that's involved. There's no like sharing of how that emotional breakdown is occurring in them. No one goes in, if they come in with a means to do a vaginal birth and you cut them to get their baby out, no one is really coming to terms with that in 3 days. They're not. And the more that you go on like business as usual with them, and I'm going to check your fundus, I'm going to, what I mean, like check your, that's great, on the medical end, but somewhere in there should be that component of, let's grieve a little bit about this, let's unpack this a little bit, because you're saying this mom home now, sometimes it wasn't her situation, but sometimes not being able to keep their lactation going because they never told them, like, now would be a good time to do some nipple stimulation or try to pump a little bit or all those things when they saw that they're taking them down this path to the cesarean. And then even without the cesarean, sometimes there's still issues with lactation, but they're just really like checking the boxes. And then you have this where it's, and I mean, I honestly think it is a lot more women of color, but it is also seeping into other, like, not just women of color. Like it is kind of like overlapping into a lot of other moms that are not, you know what I mean, that fit into that category where if they're just young, they're
I was going to say that.
inexperienced.
Yeah.
That is
Young,
First-time
a
mom.
first-time mom. Yep.
Yeah.
I see it
Yep.
a lot with the first-time moms, and especially when they're young. We are taught that the
Yes.
doctors know, and we need to be listening to
Yes.
what the doctor says. And the doctor says
Yep.
this, so you need to do this.
Their authority.
Yeah, they're
Mhm.
the authority figure. We're taught we're going to the hospital. They are the ones educated in this.
Yep.
What you've educated yourself in isn't good enough. You
Mhm.
have to listen to them, regardless of what your opinions and what you feel. But
Mhm.
that's what we're here for,
Yep.
to say no.
Yep.
You
And
have
it's
questions,
almost,
ask them.
it's just kind of creating that like that kind of like hard shell though.
Mhm.
And it's hard to mother and have
It's hard
that
to get
softer
around it.
side when you're now on defense and you feel like I think in one of these chapters she also mentions how like you just feel like, you know what I mean, attacked. Like you just feel like
Yeah. You're constantly
what
having to fight.
yeah, like what
Constant.
just happened here?
Mhm.
And everyone seems okay with it, but I don't seem okay. So something still must be wrong with me. Something's wrong with
Mhm.
my body. Now something's wrong with my mentality because I feel like things aren't okay. And
Mhm.
so yeah, that whole like practice of that I think is just not gentle enough care.